Hello, is this thing on?
Do you think they can hear us?
Nah, let's say it again. Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare. My name is Amie.
And my name is Sara.
And we are your podcast hosts.
If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Amazon, or any other podcast listening platform, don't forget to subscribe so you can get updates to when we have our latest episodes. Also, don't forget to rate and review us.
And if you like what you're hearing and you love our advocacy work, don't forget to go to www.grittynurse.com and click on the donate button.
As little as $1 or $2 a month for a total of $12 a year will help us with our monthly podcast costs, such as website hosting, our hosting platform,
audio equipment, and the time and energy it takes us to put out good quality episodes. We thank you and we appreciate you. Hi, everyone out there today. Thank you again for tuning into the Gritty Nurse Podcast. We have another lovely guest. We've been trying to get her on for quite some time, but it's really through various connections. And I don't want to say luck because I really think that we meet people for a reason and we get connected with certain people for a reason. So I'm very happy to announce that we have Renee Thompson on. And Sara, please, can you introduce our guest?
Absolutely. And even before we get started, I feel like the topic we're going to talk about today is very near and dear to our hearts. It's something that has been very pervasive in my career, and I really think I'm happy that someone like Renee is addressing it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Renee Thompson. She is the CEO and founder of the Healthy Workplace Institute and works with healthcare organizations to cultivate a professional workforce by addressing workplace bullying and incivility. Renee is one of only 26 nurses in the world who have achieved the prestigious Certified Speaking Professional designation, and in 2018 was recognized as one of LinkedIn's top 10 voices in healthcare for her contribution to their global online healthcare community. So welcome, Renee. We're so glad to have you today.
Well, thank you, Amie and Sara. Really, just thank you for having me. I am really happy to be here.
So maybe we could just start by you telling us a bit about your background. Why do you feel like incivility and bullying is so important to you? Is there a story behind why you're doing what you do?
Sure. Well, I've been a nurse for almost 30 years, and I've done pretty much everything you can do as a nurse. I mean, I worked at the bedside for many, many years. I worked as in managed care. I was a quality manager for a managed care organization. I was a home care nurse. I was a frontline manager. So I ran a unit that we were a 35-bed medical telemetry unit in a very large health system. I worked as an educator, and then I ended up in a corporate position. So, really, I was responsible for professional development of about 10,000 nurses. And it was when I was in that role and I was developing programs, new nurse residency programs, preceptor programs, and looking at certification and advanced degrees. I really spent a lot of time talking to nurses. And, you know, all they wanted to talk about was how badly the other nurses treated them. And it
Wow.
reminded me of my own experiences. And then I realized, I'll never forget the moment. All of a sudden, I realized it didn't matter what organization I worked for, what role I had, even at the corporate level. I swear there were always a group of other nurses who made it their mission to make my life difficult. And I just didn't understand it. And, we say, oh, that's just the way it is in nursing. Nurses eat their young. And I just decided enough was enough. And I wanted to do something about it. So I quit a really great job that I did love to start my own company. And honestly, it was really, I wanted to be a speaker. I found myself in front of a lot of audiences speaking, not only with my job, but speaking at conferences. And a lot of people would, tell me that they thought I was the best speaker they ever heard. And I thought, you know what, other people do this. Why not me? So I took a leap of faith, quit, started a company as a speaker. And honestly, I people really resonate with my message. And from just speaking, it's now involved into an institute. I have an online academy. I probably do more consulting now than speaking. So yeah, it's this is my life's work. I will not stop until we eradicate bullying and incivility in healthcare.
That is amazing. Like,
Mhm.
I'm just I have all the feels right now just with how your experience resonates with me, and I'm sure how it resonates with Sarah, because
Mhm,
we
mhm.
both the reason we started our podcast and left our some of our other employments were because of bullying. And it's just it's so pervasive, and
Yeah.
it's really shameful, because you know what, we really should be building each other up. Like, I think my idea, especially when I was getting into certain leadership roles, that you know, as like especially in hospitals, that as leaders go up, typically they are nurses in leadership. And I
Hmm.
was really hoping that I'd have the opportunity to be mentored by other nurses in leadership. And what I found was, instead of having that mentorship opportunity, it almost turned into an opportunity to show me how not great I was at doing things.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like, it never turned into this, you know, real mentorship relationship. It was just like, you're not doing this right, or, you know, putting me down, or those microaggressions. And it was so confusing, because I was like, I thought we were like all on the same team. But you know, maybe this is where we can kind of get into this question of, why do you think nurses eat their young?
Yeah. Well, and just to put it out there for everyone, we just don't eat our young anymore. We eat our
That's the
young,
truth.
our old, and everything in between. We're
Yeah.
just a bunch of eaters. And,
Yeah.
very similar to your experiences, Amy, no matter what role I had, you would expect that going into a new role, say a new, frontline manager, or as a new educator, that the people who were already there, skilled and competent in that role, would go out of their way to support somebody like me who was new. And you're
Mhm.
right, I found that that wasn't the case. And you have to take a step back and think why. And obviously, this is what I do for a living, so I've asked the question why many times, and looked at the reason that nurses, while so caring and compassionate to their patients, can be so cruel to each other. And there are a few reasons, and I'll just share some of them with you in the audience. When you think about disruptive behaviors, and we'll just call it that, we see more disruptive behaviors in healthcare than any other industry in the world. And
Right.
a lot of people are shocked by that. Aren't we the caring, industry? Well, think about the stressful environments that we work in. And we think about right now with
Yeah. Huge.
the global pandemic. We're seeing an uptick in disruptive behaviors, none like we've ever seen before. And so when people are stressed out and burned out, they lash out, and we see this a lot in healthcare. But then you have to think, why in particular in nursing? And it pains me to say this, I just have to tell you, because I know it's going to pain you too. You're going to feel the pain.
Oh no.
We're 90% of all nurses are women. And let's
Yeah.
face it, ladies, we're just not that nice to each other. And I do want to say we're not all like that. But you have to look at a bell curve. The skewed end. You find people who are not like that. I'm not like that. You're not like that. But there are a lot of nurses who really go out of their way to make things more difficult for other nurses, because they see them either as competition, or there's some type of jealousy, they're envious of them. And
Right.
so we see this female to female bullying and incivility. And when you look at that by itself and then apply it to nursing, 90% of us are women. Well, no wonder we see more disruptive behaviors in nursing. And what's really interesting? Because some people actually are a little offended when I say this.
Right.
And, data doesn't lie. When I look at the organizations that reach out to me for help, I do a lot of what I lovingly refer to as my deep dives in a department. I'll go into a department and I'll work hip to hip with the leadership team and the employees to really transform their culture. Guess which guess what type of department is at the top of the list?
Oh
That
dear.
is labor and delivery.
I was gonna say it's
Oh my
labor and
goodness.
delivery. No, I knew because I was gonna say
We came from the lion's den here.
it's either labor and delivery or it's emergency. And
Yeah.
I loved really I can't wait for you to unpack this.
Hmm.
I'm listening with bated breath here.
Yes, it's labor and delivery is one of the top, I'd say top three. And if you
Wow.
look traditionally at labor and delivery, there are hardly any male nurses. It's
Yeah.
99% female. And again, when working with these departments, I mean, I'm on site, I'm in the unit, I'm talking with the nurses, when we do this type of deep dive, I'm with them for a year. And we see this a lot of behavior more in the departments where it's predominantly women than men. And if we created this as women, we can change this. And it's about not saying, oh, if you're a woman, I'm going to be extra supportive, okay? But we have to take a look at when we have somebody who we're working with who's another nurse, whether they're new, they're not new, male, female. It's about, as a nurse, what can we each do to go out of our way to help that other nurse be successful? And when we look at nurses that are young and we think about the older, crusty nurse being really cruel, squashing, the
Yeah.
brand new nurse, this comes up all the time. And I counsel and coach leaders in knowing how to address this because think about this. Some of your experienced nurses, they are so incredibly competent.
Mm,
Okay. They're brilliant with their clinical skills. However, they can be incredibly cruel, especially to the newer nurses. And I encourage the leaders, the managers, to have what I refer to as the legacy conversation with these nurses who are older, experienced, and incredibly competent. It's what kind of a legacy do you want to leave when you're no longer here? What do you
right.
want people to say about you? Do you want people to say that you were so incredibly competent, you were a brilliant, clinician, but you were cruel and you didn't share that knowledge and you didn't help the, other nurses? Or do you want them to say that you were brilliant and you helped everyone to become brilliant too? And
I think that's so important.
yeah, I mean, I think we each have an ethical responsibility to advance the profession of nursing by taking a look at how do we equip this next generation of nurses to be better than we ever were. And you can't do that if you're squashing people and setting them up to fail and excluding them and criticizing them and all the things that we know is happening out there right now.
Yeah.
So it's a problem.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Like, and I remember even in my own experience, like, you know, and being an educator or whatnot, we look to some of these legacy nurses or nurses who have really great clinical skills to help mentor some of our newer nurses or whatnot.
Hmm.
And and the fear that we even had as educators to be like, oh my God, we have to go ask this person to maybe
Yes.
mentor. Like, why am I so scared? Why am I scared to even go ask this person? And then it's this whole cultural thing where it's like, okay, I've asked them, now they've said no, and it's like almost they get backed up by like the senior leaders who are like, oh, you know what, they don't have to do it, just get someone who wants to do it. And it's like, well, they show some of the best clinical skills here. Just because
Right.
they're crotchety doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to help. But it's just like it's this whole cyclical right from the top down culture.
It is. And, when we go into an organization and we really start this work, we always start with the leadership team.
Mm,
Because what I know about leaders, and it's the same is true with me when I was in, that frontline manager role, nobody is teaching the managers, those frontline leaders, how to set behavioral expectations and hold people accountable for their behavior. And I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with frontline managers who have said to me, no, you don't understand. this nurse has been here for 30 years. And if I say anything to her, she will retaliate against me and make my life a
Right.
living hell. And, so the leaders are doing workarounds and they're justifying people's behavior. And then when you have these new nurses who are, maybe courageous enough to speak up and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. What we hear back from a lot of leaders is, you know what? Don't take anything she says to you personally, or you know what, you're going to have to grow a thick skin around here, or suck it up,
Mhm.
buttercup, this is what
Yeah.
nursing's all about. It's and it's such a problem. And if we continue to just justify somebody's bad behavior because of how good they are, what they do, this is what's created the cultures that we have right now, and how everybody in healthcare knows, about bullying and incivility. It's because we've justified people's behaviors for a century now, I swear, maybe
Hmm.
longer.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think you touched on so many important issues, Renee. And I think part of it is that in nursing, I find especially seniority is held in really high regard, right? So, like you
Hmm.
said, that nurse that's been there 30 years can pretty much get away with whatever she wants because she's been there 30 years. Like,
Yeah.
I've worked on units where certain nurses refused to scrub for C-sections. Somehow they got away with it for so long. And
Hmm.
when it really came down to it, we realized that they didn't know how. And but because they held that power, they were able to come up with excuses upon excuses and really just leave the rest of the work to their team. So I think it's just
Right.
about not letting, we need to set a precedent as leaders, and we really need to hold people accountable for their actions. Um, I just wanted to touch on something else because you mentioned that it's mainly the female dominated professions that
Hmm.
are experiencing this. Have you noticed in your work with other healthcare groups, like, have you noticed something similar when there's a lot of females involved? I'm just trying to figure out if it's
Hmm.
more of a nursing thing with the pressures that come with nursing, or if it's more of a female issue that you're seeing.
Well, it's really interesting. When I first started this work, it was all about nurse to nurse, bullying and incivility, because I'm a nurse. That's what I experienced. And then
Hmm.
when I really started to kind of go down the rabbit hole, I realize it's not just nurses, it's everyone. And
Right.
now we tackle the entire healthcare team. We see more disruptive behaviors in nursing. And I truly believe part of the reason, it's just one reason, is because we're a female dominated profession. However, we also see very similar behaviors with physicians and the support staff. And I always say it's not any one of us, it's all of us who contribute to the culture in our workplace. And so, what we do now is, well, because nursing represents the largest workforce in any organization, okay, healthcare organization, we always start with nursing, but we truly add everyone as part of the team: physicians, support staff, you know, therapists, the unit secretary, everybody is involved. Because, again, when you look at a department and the behaviors that are tolerated, it's not just the nurse. I remember there were some nursing assistants who had been there for decades. Let me
Yeah.
tell you, woo, you crossed one of them and they made your life miserable. So again,
Yeah.
it's not just the nurses, it's everyone.
Well,
Hmm.
that's a really good point, because if you think about it and you think about how culture works, you can't just change a couple parts. You have to look at the whole system. It's a whole systems approach. And then if
Yep.
these people who are not necessarily intricately involved in the system, but they're witnessing it, it's like that bystander effect, right?
Right.
So they're watching, but they're not going to do anything about it because they've been seeing how it's been handled for how many years. So they're just kind of like, well,
Right.
you know what? We see it. It's perpetuated. It's okay.
Right.
And it's a whole systems approach, and I think that's a really fantastic lens that you have,
Hmm.
that you can bring that piece in. I kind of wanted to circle back to one thing. So we talked a lot about, like, yes, because you said it happens in nursing, not just to young nurses, but
Mm-mm.
like nurses eat all types of nurses. So like back to
Yes.
the whole, like, start from the top all the way down. Like when I think about even just some of my own experiences, really, I feel like it's the incivility is different at different levels. So I feel
Hmm.
like when I was in more leadership roles, it was more about like gaslighting and
Mm,
these kind of like microaggressions that you kind of that made you second guess what your own leadership and your own expertise and your own ability to think and process these things. Where at a different level, where you're a newer nurse, it might be just targeting some of those like initial skills, like, oh, you don't know how to do that. Where
right.
at
Made you
at
feel
higher levels,
stupid.
yeah,
Hmm.
we're at higher levels, it's like gaslighting. And it's just that whole, like, maybe you're right, that whole threatening piece, like, instead of building this person up to be my successor, I'm actually threatened by them. And I got
Right.
that sense quite a bit. And I don't know if you can maybe touch on even just your experience a little bit
Yeah.
more, just in like how do you manage that? Like,
Well,
I found that was the difficult part for me.
it is difficult. And I think we can all agree when a behavior is very overt, somebody's yelling at you and criticizing you and using profanity and, sending you the nasty grams and all of that, that's pretty clear cut. That's not what we're always talking about, though. And I think for the
Right.
most part, and even when I start working with an organization, we start with the easy things. I just had a conversation with a client this morning with a leadership group, and I said, okay, we're all going to agree. And we were talking about a lot of things. How are disruptive behaviors showing up in your department right now? And one of the things that they shared was there's a lot of yelling, arguing, and cursing. And we
Right.
talked about this, and there are a lot of reasons why, we have to tackle this early on, but we all agreed that anytime they heard yelling, cursing, arguing, they were going to immediately interrupt that behavior. And I gave them, some strategies to be able to do that. But we all committed as a leadership group that they were all going to address that.
Right.
You always start there. That's easy. But what you're talking about is some of that covert stuff that is that really what's going on here? Did I interpret that the right way, or did she mean to do that? Or when you say gaslighting, that is totally covert.
Right.
You don't know you're the target of gaslighting until you're at the point where you feel sick about your work and you're questioning yourself. And it happened to me when I was in a corporate position. I didn't know it was gaslighting. I didn't know I was a target of this until after it was over.
Yes.
And what I found, I'd go to my boss and I would say, "Oh, I'm really struggling with, this situation. I don't know why you're struggling. I don't have any problem with it." Or she wouldn't. And meanwhile, I had found out later on that she had problems with our um, assistant. She's like, "I think maybe Renee, you're not good at delegating. Maybe you're not a good communicator." Maybe. And I started questioning myself. And then she wouldn't want me to go to meetings. I'm like, well, this is a
Right.
meeting I really, oh, no, 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 I'll go. And I found out why, because she was taking credit for my work. Okay.
Oh my god.
Unbelievable.
And, and I didn't know this was going on, but something kept, kind of poking at me saying, like, this isn't right. Or is it? And I always look at myself. Okay, I didn't handle that well. Maybe I should have done this. Maybe it's because of this. Maybe it's because she doesn't think I'm competent enough. And I'm going to tell you what happened to me. Okay, I don't talk about this a lot, but in the 3 years that I was in that job before she ended up leaving, we changed the whole structure of corporate, and then I was there for another year before I quit to start my own company. So during that period of time, I ended up with TMJ so bad that I couldn't open up my mouth to fit in a blueberry or chew oatmeal,
Oh my
and
god.
pretty aggressive thyroid cancer. So I'm just telling you, it without you even doing anything, okay? Especially when it's covert, and you mentioned gaslighting, things like that, your body will respond. Like, your body absorbs that stress and it will affect you. And uh, there's not an easy answer for this. It's just, I think, at least starting by having a sense of awareness that this might be happening, and allowing yourself to separate yourself from the situation so that you can get some objectivity and clarity on it before it, like I said, it really ate me up, and I didn't even realize what was happening until it was over.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Renee. I think that's really important for people to hear. I mean, I'm sure Amie has her own story, but I feel like I had a lot of health issues as well. And
Mhm.
when you're being gaslit, my first response, just maybe it's my personality, is I always question myself. I remember saying to other people, am I crazy? Did this really happen? Because my experience was that someone who was my superior would say something to me, and I would actually write it down, things I was supposed to do. And then when I would go back to her, she would say, that's not what I said. I wanted you to do this other thing. But it was actually opposite to what she told me before. But
Yeah.
because I had been taking notes, I knew that wasn't the case, but I kept giving this person the benefit of the doubt. And then, in the end, it just became too much for me. And I think that it's really important for us to have these conversations. It's definitely more prevalent than we think it is.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate that we lose a lot of good people that way.
Yeah, and I think
Yes.
people forget about the physical symptoms, right? Sometimes
Right.
they might ignore that and just be like, that's just, whatever the case may be. Cause like I remember it got to the point where I was actually so afraid that I was hiding under my desk. And I was like, what
Wow.
the hell am I doing here? Like
Right.
I would hear her footsteps coming down the hall and I would like hide. I was like, okay, if I turn off the lights in my office or whatever, maybe she won't even think that I'm here. And I was like, and I remember sitting there going, what am I doing here? Like, what,
Mhm.
how am I at the point where I am so terrified that I'm doing this? And I think people forget about that the stress can affect you physically. And please, our listeners, don't negate those physical symptoms because they can really take a toll, like you had mentioned, Renee. And I'm so
Oh,
thankful
yeah.
that you shared that with us.
Yeah, it was a really stressful time in my life, but I thought I could handle it. After all, I was in a corporate job, okay? You
Right.
have to
Yeah.
maintain that sort of standard. And I realized after that, and I actually, this was before I really started to, uh, before I put my stake in the ground to say, that's it, enough is enough. I need to do something about it. It was part of my journey to get me to the point where I could say, and I wanted to say, enough." I needed to do something because I don't want anybody else to go through what I went through. And when I hear stories, both of your stories, it breaks my heart
Yeah.
because you take those stories and you multiply it by, gosh, hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, somebody reaches out to me pretty much every day
Oh my
with
gosh.
asking for help, and that's why you know, I can't help every single person, although I do my best. It's funny because I'll say to my husband, it'll be the weekend, and I'll say, okay, I have a couple of calls today. Okay, this girl, she reached out. I told her if you want to talk, I have Saturday that I can talk to you because most of my time is spent working with my leaders, my consulting clients. But and that's why I have what I have on my website. I have a lot of free resources. I write articles. We have videos, just to do whatever I can to equip more and more nurses with the skills and tools that they need to address this. And one thing that's really important for the listeners to know too is that 40% of all people who are being targeted, and the targets of bullying, they never speak up. They don't tell anyone, but a lot of their coworkers know that they're being targeted. And I think we owe it to each other as human beings to speak up on behalf of someone else. And even if it's intervening, when you see somebody being treated with such cruelty, is to intervene and say, time out here. The way you're talking to her right now is really disrespectful and unprofessional, and you need to stop, and then go and support the person who was just yelled at. But we have an ethical responsibility, all of us, to speak up when we witness really disruptive behaviors, especially happening to our colleagues. And it doesn't matter if it's a nurse, a housekeeper. I mean, I've intervened, you know watching a nurse be really cruel to a housekeeper. Like, no, 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 we don't do that here. We don't talk to people like that here. It's not okay. And then again, go support the person who was, treated that way.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I am so incredibly thankful for you. I don't think you even realize the impact that you have on individuals' lives. And I think this gets lost on people who do this type of work, right? Like the fact that you're having these conversations, that you take the time out of your day, like, yes, it's a part of something that you do now, but like you still have your own life to live, right? And the fact that you will take
Yeah.
the time out of the day to say, "Hey, I got one more call." I don't think how thankful and how grateful nurses are to have someone like you. So let me tell you
Thank
today,
you.
if you haven't heard it from them, it's not thankless work. Honest to God, thank you, thank you, thank you so much, because people like you are gems. We can't forget about the work that you do and how meaningful it is, because I remember being in such a dark place,
Hmm.
not knowing that, will I be able to continue to work? Because I actually ended up going on sick leave. Will I be able to function as a human being, or be productive again? And it is through conversations with you, with conversations with Sarah, with opening up a podcast to say, you know what, I've had enough, and I'm not
Hmm.
going to be silenced anymore. That I'm grateful and I'm thankful. But before we wrap up, we do have one more question,
Hmm.
and I think this will kind of talk about, like, what are some of the tangible things that anyone can do when bullying occurs, and how do you know when it's just like, okay, enough is enough, I need to do something
Right.
completely differently here.
Right. Well, the best advice that I can give somebody who's maybe never spoken up before and just wants to start, again, I always say focus on those things that are tangible, they're objective, you can actually see them. So I always start with, again, those things that are overt. Somebody yells at you, if they roll their eyes at you, which is not really bullying, but any rude behavior that you can physically see or hear. I always say, make it simple, start there. The easiest thing for you to do is just to name the behavior. It's just, you're yelling at me in front of, like in a patient care hallway. You just cursed at me. You just dropped the F bomb. You're yelling, you're screaming at me, you're criticizing me in front of other people. And sometimes that's all you need to do. It's really fascinating. And you might not think doing something like this will stop somebody's behavior or stop someone from treating you like that again. But I'm telling you what, the people who have done this just looked somebody in the eye and named the behavior. At least in half of them, the behavior stopped after that immediately, because what's going to happen is if you don't say anything, they think it's okay to treat you like that. The first time you look at somebody who's yelling at you and just say, "You're yelling at me in front of everyone." And now I like to add a little bit more and say, "And it's not okay. Like the way you're talking to me right now is not okay."
Right.
I am so big on scripting. I am a big scripter because I don't know if you're like me, but when somebody says something rude to me or they embarrass me in front of other people, I don't know what to say in the moment. I kind of say
Yes,
stupid. I say stupid
exactly.
things, and then the next day when I'm in the shower, oh, I can think of all sorts of things to say. Okay, but by then it's too late. So this is why scripting is so powerful. It's you identify a behavior that somebody has been, you've been the target of over and over again, and identify an appropriate script and then practice it so that when that person treats you that way again, you could be ready with that script. And it's really funny. I have one of my YouTube videos is a video where I interviewed my daughter, who was a school teacher at the time, and she was dealing with somebody, a coworker, who would embarrass her in front of other people. And she's great. She tells the whole story, and she reached out to me and she asked for help. And I said, Kate, the next time she says something like this to you, I just want you to look her in the eye and say, I'm offended by that comment. That's it.
I love
And
that.
my daughter, I said, you practice it. My daughter was funny on the video. She's like, I was waiting for her to say something. Okay. Cause she had practiced the script. And sure enough, this, coworker said something really rude to her, and she always did this in front of other people, never when they were by themselves. And so my daughter looked her in the eye and said that, I'm offended by that comment. And the teacher, I'm just messing with you. They get defensive. Well, guess what?
Right,
She
yeah.
worked with that teacher for another year and a half. That teacher never did anything like that to her again.
That is something that's so amazing and so simple too. I really like your YouTube videos, Renee, because you give very concrete examples of what you can do. So I think that's really important for people that are feeling lost. They don't have any tools in their toolbox
Mhm.
as to how they can address the problems that are happening. So I think that's really, really valuable too. Where can people find you?
Yes. Well, I have a website that I'm very proud of. Okay. And it's healthyworkforceinstitute.com. Okay. So healthyworkforceinstitute.com. And on that website, you can find all of my social media platforms or at the bottom in the footer of every page. But I want you to go to, I have a resource section. There's a lot of free downloads there. I have, some a download on how to be burnout, because remember, when people are burned out and stressed out, they lash out. But I've been writing articles. I have had a blog for 10 years, won lots of awards for my blog. So I've written so much about bullying. It's funny when somebody reaches out to me and they say, I'm being bullied, what do I do? um, I answer whatever I can, but then I refer them. I've written about this so many times. Go through, those articles and then come back to me, okay? Because it's all right there for you and it's all free. Yeah, I do
Right,
have
right, right.
products, I have books and things like that, but mostly everything on my website is free.
Thank you. We really appreciate all of the work and the energy and the time that you spend putting into those resources, especially the free ones, because I could tell you, I mean, nurses sometimes, especially younger ones, we're a little bit broke when we finish nursing school. So we
Right.
appreciate any type of resource that you can give us to support us. Um,
Absolutely.
Sarah, do you have any other things that you'd like to add or?
No, no, I just think, Renee, you're so inspiring. I know a lot of people really benefit from your work, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, thank you. You seriously made my day, because even though I talk about, how do you create a positive, professional workplace, it's funny. I sometimes think to myself, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. There's so much more that I need to be doing. And so to hear you just give me a lot of gratitude for this, you truly made my day and reminded me that I am doing good work. And just so you know, there's more to come. So I
Oh,
still have
that's,
a lot
oh, I'm
lot
so
more work
glad
to
to hear
do, but
that. Your work does not go unnoticed.
well,
You
thank
are
you.
an empowered, powerful woman. We're very thankful to have you on our show.
Well, and I am happy to be a guest on your show and to really help all of your listeners and nurses. And even if you're not a nurse listening to this, it's about, understanding that the way we treat each other is truly just as important as the care that we provide.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.